Hey, welcome back to Trek on the Tube. This is my review and Easter eggs video for Star Trek Discovery, Season 3, Episode 8, The Sanctuary. There is so much to go over, so let's just get going. I had a lot of fun watching this episode, and the easiest way to explain why is because I think the episode found balance in many of its aspects. There was action, fighting and explosions with ship flybys, but it was never over the top. There were emotional moments, but not overpowering moody sequences. Like there were happy moments, sad moments, quirky lines that delivered fun sequences. So what I mean when I say emotional is I felt multiple different emotions. I also found the episode to handle its own self-contained story and the greatest story of the season quite well in regards to each other, like they had the right amount of distributed screen time and development. And then we got some great use of the ensemble cast. Book and Burnham doing their thing on the planet's surface. They have great chemistry. Tilly and Saru, with Tilly really working well as acting first officer, with one of the stronger Mary Wiseman performances, I have to say. But what's fantastic, and this is why I mentioned the ensemble aspect of it all, is that we also got to see a lot more of the characters we're not used to seeing that much of. And wow, did all of those pair-offs work wonders. We got that fun, dynamic action comedy duo with Detmer and Rin on Book's ship. Culber and Georgiou's story dealt more with the intrigue and the mystery revolving around her condition. And then of course Stamets and Adira. Their relationship is evolving, growing, and that whole thing. The Adira coming out is that story thread that perpetuates that long-lasting Star Trek trait of inclusiveness and firsts. Okay, so I think this episode will be easier for me to talk about if I break it into different segments, each segment being one of the duos that we just mentioned, considering each duo really did play a big part in either the actual story of the episode or the overarching plot of the season. I'll start with Adira and Stamets, and look, I'm not a member of the LGBT community, which means my opinion on this whole matter might not be the most pertinent online. If you're looking for that, I would highly suggest going and checking out Jesse Gender's channel. That's probably a go-to, or at least a good place to start. But anyway, here are my thoughts on this. First, the moment where Adira addressed the pronoun situation didn't feel forced or played up in any way. It felt very genuine, very sincere, very grounded in reality, and I liked that a lot. Second, I was a bit afraid that somehow the show was going to connect Adira's gender identity and pronoun change with the fact that there's now a Trill symbiont in the mix. And in my mind, that's not what non-binary or trans people in today's world are looking for when it comes to on-screen representation. So the fact that Adira said, "I have always felt like a they, never like a she," and Gray knew this even before I was joined, I think was a real good move on the show's part. It's the human that Adira is that feels that way, not the host, if that makes sense. Anyway, that whole thing, that whole subplot, as we mentioned earlier, is the element of the episode that perpetuated Star Trek tradition, and it was great to have it. Let's now move on to Book and Burnham with their kinda, somewhat Starfleet mission and the whole family thing. It was interesting learning more about who Book is, how the Emerald Chain has affected him, his family, his kin. It was great seeing him on screen with Burnham because the two of them truly do have great chemistry, and I love that duo. And I liked the way the mission was handled, with both someone from Starfleet and the Federation and someone that wasn't. Moving on to Tilly and Saru, I thought they were both great this time around. I'm still not convinced placing Tilly as acting first officer was the best of ideas, but there was something about how she was written and how Wiseman portrayed her that helped it all make a little more sense. In some scenes, she was really owning up to that position and being as assertive as a first officer needs to be, but other times, I really did feel like she was just kind of guessing her way into decisions, but that all clicked with me. When you find yourself in a position of leadership for the first time, some decisions come naturally and make sense, but sometimes you kind of just do what you think is best and cross your fingers. There's a delicate line to the reality of that situation in regards to the real world that I think was well navigated here. Continuing on, we had Detmer and Rin. God, was that fun. Okay, visually it felt a bit more like Star Wars than Star Trek. They were doing the trench run type passes, and that's not the only Star Wars thing in this episode, by the way, but it was good fun. Is it 100% logical that this small vessel, all alone, is tough enough to take on the flagship of the Emerald Chain, or at least one of the biggest ships from that organization? Maybe not. Even if it does seem to be a pretty badass ship. And, I mean, they didn't destroy the Emerald Chain vessel, they only disabled the weapons. Also, couldn't have Rin just asked for political asylum? I mean, that would have pretty much settled the diplomatic issue, I think. If you ask for asylum and the Federation or Starfleet grants it, then there's pretty much nothing anyone else can do about it. But hey, the plot demanded that they find themselves on the smaller ship, and it was fun. There was humor with the cat, and even if we only got a very small glimpse at both actors together, I felt they also had great chemistry, and I am definitely down to see more of them together. Finally, Georgiou and Culber, and Pollard, a bit. We still don't really know what's going on with the Emperor, but that wasn't the story. The story wasn't about what's physically wrong with her, but rather about her accepting the help and acknowledging that she can't handle the situation alone. It wasn't specified whether or not Pollard is chief medical officer, by the way, but I enjoyed the fact Culber did his best and then, you know, he went to get her. I also appreciate how Culber is taking on more of a counselor type role aboard the ship, and the way Georgiou was handled. Her snarky, vicious comments reflective of her personality and overall character was still there, but the character itself didn't impose onto the many little storylines we had going. Balance. It's all about balance. As I said earlier, frankly, the Sanctuary, I think, managed to balance all of these moving parts very well. A final thought I have to share is that I found this episode to feel more Kelvin timeline than Prime timeline. Now, I'm going to use some generic terms to get my point across, so don't get mad if you don't fully agree. The Prime timeline shows, for the most part, are intellectual Star Trek. The Kelvin timeline films are, for the most part, action Star Trek, so dumb fun. Is there stupid action in the Prime timeline shows? Yes. Are there intellectually challenging situations in the Kelvin timeline films? Yes, but generally speaking, broadly speaking, Prime is more a concentrate of the essence of Star Trek, whereas Kelvin is more a diluted flavor of Star Trek mixed into something else. But that works. It's great. It works great because it enables us to have different versions, two stories, two styles of Star Trek and of the franchise. Now, does it make sense to set a Kelvin-style show within Prime? No, not really. If you're trying to adhere to a certain coherence and era, but here we're 900 years in the future. There's barely anything left to adhere to, so the fact that Sanctuary went in that Kelvin-style direction worked wonderfully for me. It was captivating entertainment with great visual effects, nice fight scenes, good intrigue, splashed with a Star Trek flavor, rather than seeming to try to force its failing Star Trekness down our throats. I don't know if that came out right, but you know what? Sometimes finding the right words to use isn't always easy. Okay. Solid episode. One last thing about that Star Trek flavor is the problem solving. I thought that the problem solving and engineering this time around was really fun, and I do have to say that both the cinematography and the directing were fantastic. Jonathan Frakes did a really good job this time around. Last time he directed, I was a little on the fence. I didn't even notice that it was him. This time, yes, it was clearly him. You could feel his style, his flair, and I really love that. A lot of the shots were beautiful to look at. Let's now move on to the very short list of Easter eggs and references I managed to compile, starting with the episode's name, The Sanctuary. This probably doesn't even count as a reference because the two episodes are completely unrelated, but there's a Deep Space Nine episode called simply Sanctuary. Continuing on with similar names, Osiris' ship is called the Viridian. We've already seen and heard of the Viridian sector before in Star Trek Generations. The whole idea of a distress signal masked or carried with another sound like a song or a background noise has been a thing in the franchise for a while now. Riker did it in The Next Generation, for example. Saru trying to find something to say when giving the order to either jump to warp or get something done has now become a classic theme or running gag in Star Trek, or at least modern Star Trek. I don't want to spoil too much about Lower Decks, but the captains in that show either have their unique one-liners already or are searching for them. This whole thing, by the way, came to be with both Pikes, because Kelvin Pike said punch it once, I think it was, and so Discovery put a spin on that when they gave us Prime Pike. His was hit it, and now it's a thing, right? Engage, make it so, hit it, punch it, everyone needs their own thing. We finish off with this Star Trek Picard era badge in the scrapyard and the Star Wars nods. There were the trench runs that we mentioned earlier, and the concept of getting locked up in a disgusting old room with a giant creature felt very Star Wars too. Alright, that's all from me. Thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, share with your friends. Thank you so much to all the channel patrons. As usual, live long and prosper.